The snow was coming down hard that February morning when I saw Karren Darlene standing in my driveway, arms crossed and face redder than a fire hydrant, even though the temperature was barely 15 degrees. I knew right then this was going to be one of those days. "Owen Edwards, I need to speak with you immediately," she announced, her voice cutting through the sound of my truck idling in the garage. I had been about to head out on my morning route, the one I had been running for the county for the past 8 winters here in Traverse City, Michigan. I killed the engine and climbed out, my boots crunching on the packed snow. "Morning, Karren. What can I do for you?" As president of the Lakeview Heights HOA, I am formally requesting that you provide me with a complete map of your snow plow routes, including times, streets, and priority areas. She held up her phone like it was some kind of badge of authority. "I'm invoicing you for damages to common areas you allegedly plowed incorrectly last week." I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "What damages? And what do you mean my routes?" "The snowbank you created blocked the entrance to the community mailbox station. Mrs. Peterson couldn't get her medication for 2 whole hours." Karren's nostrils flared. "As someone who operates a commercial snow removal business within our community, you are required to disclose all operational information to the HOA board. It's in the bylaws, Section 12, subsection D." I rubbed my face with my gloved hand. This was going to be more complicated than I thought. "Karren, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I don't operate a commercial snow removal business. I'm a county contractor. I plow the public roads for Grand Traverse County." "Exactly. And those public roads run through our HOA community. Therefore, you must share your route information with us." She pulled out a tablet from her enormous designer purse and started scrolling. "You also need to pay the $45 assessment we voted on last month for commercial vehicle storage. Your plow truck is clearly visible from the street." That assessment was for people running actual businesses out of their homes, which I'm not doing, and I can't just share my route information. My contract with the county includes confidentiality clauses. Karren's eyes narrowed. "Confidentiality? For a snow plow route? Don't be ridiculous, Owen. This is a residential community, not the Pentagon." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "Look, there are legitimate reasons why the county keeps that information restricted. It includes details about emergency routes, response times, and infrastructure that could be a security concern if it got into the wrong hands. But more importantly, it's proprietary information that belongs to the county, not me. I don't care about the county's rules. I care about HOA rules, and you live here, which means you follow our rules." Karren tapped her tablet screen aggressively. "You have 48 hours to provide that information, or I'm filing a formal complaint with the board and assessing you a daily fine of $100 until you comply." I felt my jaw tighten. "You can't do that, Karren." "Actually, I can. It's in the updated bylaws that were passed 6 months ago. Maybe if you had attended the meetings instead of sitting in that garage all the time, you'd know that." She turned on her heel, her boots slipping slightly on the ice. 48 hours, Owen. I expect a full route map, including GPS coordinates, time stamps, and any areas you deem priority. Oh, and I want a written explanation for why you created that snowbank by the mailboxes." I watched her march back across the street to her house, a massive McMansion that looked like it belonged in a suburb of Dallas rather than northern Michigan. Karren and her husband had moved to Lakeview Heights about a year ago, and within 3 months, she had somehow gotten herself elected HOA president. The previous president, a retired teacher named Margaret, had been running things smoothly for a decade. But Margaret moved to Florida, and Karren swooped in with promises of elevated community standards and enhanced property values. Since then, life in the neighborhood had become a series of petty regulations and power trips. She had tried to ban Christmas decorations that weren't tasteful, which apparently meant only white lights and wreaths with red bows. She had attempted to institute a rule about what color cars could be parked in driveways. She had even sent a letter to the Johnsons 3 houses down demanding they remove their vegetable garden because it wasn't aesthetically consistent with community values. But this was different. This wasn't about decorations or garden gnomes. This was about my livelihood and a legal contract with the county. I got back in my truck and headed out for my morning route, but my mind was racing the whole time. As I cleared County Road 633, then moved on to the residential streets that fed into town, I kept thinking about Karren's demand. The confidentiality clause in my contract wasn't just some throwaway legal jargon. The county had explained it to me when I first signed on 8 years ago, back when I was just looking for steady winter work after my construction business slowed down during the cold months. The routes were planned with emergency services in mind. Fire stations, police stations, the hospital, schools, all of these had priority. But the county didn't want that information publicly available because it could potentially be used by people with bad intentions. It sounded paranoid when they first explained it, but after 9/11 and various other security concerns over the years, municipalities had gotten a lot more careful about what operational information they shared. Plus, the routes themselves were considered proprietary. The county had spent time and resources developing efficient patterns that minimized fuel costs and maximized coverage. They didn't want competing contractors getting their hands on that information. When I finished my route around 2 that afternoon, I headed straight to the County Department of Public Works. My supervisor, Tom Richardson, was in his office buried under paperwork as usual. "Owen, what brings you in? Route go okay today?" Tom looked up, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Route was fine, but I've got a problem." I sat down and explained the whole situation with Karren and her demand for my route map. Tom's expression darkened as I talked. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long whistle. "Well, that's a new one. In 23 years with the county, I've never had an HOA try to pull something like this. So what do I do? She's threatening to fine me $100 a day if I don't hand it over." "You tell her no, politely but firmly." Tom pulled out a folder from his filing cabinet. "Your contract is clear, Owen. You signed a non-disclosure agreement regarding route information, timing, and county operational procedures. If you violate that, we can terminate your contract and potentially pursue legal action." My stomach dropped. Legal action? I'm not saying we would, but technically, yes, that NDA is binding. Tom flipped through some papers. "Let me get Karren's full name and address. I'm going to have our legal department send her a cease and desist letter. An HOA doesn't have the authority to override a county contract, and they certainly can't compel you to violate a legal agreement you have with a government entity." I gave him all of Karren's information, including her official HOA president email address that she insisted everyone use instead of her personal one. Tom said he'd get the legal team on it first thing tomorrow morning. "In the meantime," Tom added, "document everything. Every interaction with this woman, every threat, every demand. If this escalates, we're going to need a paper trail." I drove home feeling slightly better but still uneasy. Karren wasn't the type to back down easily, and I had a feeling that a cease and desist letter was going to make her even angrier. Sure enough, the next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange notice taped to my front door. It was an official HOA violation notice, complete with the Lakeview Heights logo at the top. Notice of non-compliance, it read. Owen Edwards of 342 Pinewood Drive is hereby notified that he is in violation of HOA Bylaws Section 12, subsection D, regarding disclosure of commercial operations within the community. Failure to comply within the mandated timeframe will result in daily fines of $100, plus administrative fees of $25 per incident. Additionally, Mr. Edwards is in violation of Section 8, subsection A, regarding commercial vehicle storage and is hereby assessed a one-time fee of $45, plus monthly fees of $20 thereafter. I crumpled the notice in my fist. This was getting ridiculous. I grabbed my phone and called the number at the bottom of the notice, which went straight to Karren's voicemail. This is Karren Darlene, president of Lakeview Heights HOA. Please leave a detailed message including your address and nature of your concern, and I will respond within 3 to 5 business days as my schedule permits. Karren, this is Owen Edwards. I'm not violating any HOA bylaws. My work for the county doesn't constitute a commercial operation within the community, and I'm not sharing confidential contract information. You need to withdraw this violation notice immediately. I hung up and immediately called Tom Richardson. They escalated. We're already on it, Tom assured me. Legal sent out the cease and desist at 8 this morning via certified mail and email. They made it very clear that any attempt to fine you or penalize you for refusing to break your contract with the county would be met with legal action from the county attorney's office. Will that actually stop her? It should. Most HOAs back down once they realize they're dealing with a government entity and potential legal fees. But like I said, document everything. The cease and desist didn't stop Karren. If anything, it made her double down. 2 days later, I received a letter in the mail from the HOA's attorney, a guy named Marcus Webb from a firm in Grand Rapids. The letter essentially reiterated everything Karren had been saying, dressed up in legal language about HOA authority, community standards, and homeowner obligations. I forwarded it immediately to Tom, who forwarded it to the county legal team. What followed was a back and forth between lawyers that I mostly stayed out of, but I could see the tension building in the neighborhood. Karren started a campaign. She sent out an email to the entire HOA mailing list painting me as someone who thought he was above the rules, and who was putting the community at risk by refusing to coordinate my snow removal activities with the HOA. She claimed that my reckless plowing had caused thousands of dollars in damage to common areas, and that my refusal to share information was preventing the board from taking appropriate preventive measures. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. In a community of about 60 homes, opinions started to split. Some people sided with Karren, either because they genuinely believed her or because they were afraid of crossing her. Others thought the whole thing was ridiculous. My neighbor, Bill Anderson, came over one evening to show me a petition Karren was circulating. Have you seen this? She's trying to get signatures to force a special meeting to revoke your right to park your truck at your house. I looked at the petition. It had maybe 15 signatures out of the 45 needed. Can she even do that? I don't know, man, but she's really pushing it. She stopped by yesterday and spent 20 minutes trying to convince me that you were violating everyone's property rights by having a commercial vehicle in your driveway. I told her it was just a truck with a plow on it, and she went off about how it was lowering property values. Property values, I muttered. That's rich coming from someone who painted their front door burgundy and put up those ridiculous columns that look like they belong on a plantation. Bill laughed. Hey, those columns are classical architecture according to her. The situation got worse when Karren filed a complaint with the county, claiming that I had damaged HOA property during my plowing routes. She sent photos of the snowbank by the mailboxes, along with pictures of some tire tracks in the grass near the community entrance sign. Tom called me in to talk about it. Okay, so the county investigated her complaint. The snowbank by the mailboxes isn't even on your route. That's a private street that the HOA is responsible for maintaining. County roads don't go through there. I know that. I told her that. And the tire tracks by the entrance sign. Those are from the HOA's own contracted snow removal service. We checked with them. They admitted that their guy cut the corner too tight a few weeks ago. Tom shook his head. This woman is just making things up at this point. So what happens now? Now we document that her complaint was investigated and found to be without merit. And honestly, Owen, I think it's time we pushed back harder. She's wasting county resources with these false complaints. Our legal team is recommending we send her a formal warning that continued harassment of a county contractor could result in her being banned from filing future complaints and potentially facing charges for filing false reports. That should have been the end of it, but Karren was nothing if not persistent. A week later, I came home to find that someone had put nails under my tires while I was out on my route. All 4 tires were flat by the time I got home. I called the police to report it, and they took a statement and photos, but without any witnesses or security camera footage, there wasn't much they could do. I couldn't prove it was Karren, but I had my suspicions. Especially when Bill mentioned that he had seen her walking past my house that morning, which was odd since she lived on the opposite side of the neighborhood and had no reason to be on my street. I'm not saying it was her, Bill said carefully. But she was definitely over here, and she was looking at your truck pretty intently. I decided to install security cameras, 2 facing the driveway, 1 facing the front door, and 1 covering the side yard where I parked my truck. It cost me $400, but it was worth it for the peace of mind. The cameras paid off 2 days later when they caught Karren herself walking up to my house at 6 in the morning and taping another violation notice to my door. This one claimed that I had failed to respond to the previous violations, and that my fines were now accumulating at a rate of $100 per day, totaling already $1,400, plus administrative fees. But what was interesting was what the camera caught after she taped the notice. She walked around to my truck and stood there for a solid 5 minutes, just staring at it. Then she pulled out her phone and took pictures of the plow, the truck, my license plate, and my house from various angles. She even tried the driver's side door handle to see if it was unlocked. I sent the footage to both Tom Richardson and the police. The police said that while it was suspicious, she hadn't actually done anything illegal by trying the door handle or taking pictures from the street. But Tom had a different take. That's harassment, he said firmly. She's building some kind of case against you, probably to use at an HOA meeting. But trying the door handle on your truck, that crosses a line. I'm forwarding this to county legal and recommending they pursue a restraining order. The idea of a restraining order against my HOA president seemed extreme, but Tom insisted. She's escalating, Owen. First it was demands for information, then false complaints, then someone flattens your tires, which we can't prove but seems pretty obvious. Now she's prowling around your property at dawn. What's next? He had a point. I agreed to let the county legal team pursue it. Meanwhile, Karren called for a special HOA meeting to discuss ongoing violations and non-compliance by a community member. The meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday evening at the community center. a small building at the entrance to the neighborhood that the HOA used for gatherings. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to just ignore it and let the lawyers handle everything. But another part of me felt like I needed to face this head-on and clear the air with my neighbors who had been hearing only Karren's side of the story. The community center was packed when I arrived. It seemed like almost every household had sent at least one representative. Karren stood at the front of the room with a microphone, a projector screen behind her showing a PowerPoint presentation titled Community Standards and Equal Application of Rules. "Thank you all for coming," Karren began, her voice syrupy sweet. "I know it's a cold evening, but this is an important matter that affects all of us. For the past several weeks, one of our residents has repeatedly refused to comply with HOA regulations, has claimed exemption from rules that apply to everyone else, and has even gotten government agencies involved to try to intimidate your HOA board into backing down." I felt my face flush. She was spinning this completely backward. "Owen Edwards, who is here tonight," she gestured toward me, and everyone turned to look, "operates a commercial snow plowing business. He keeps his commercial vehicle parked in his driveway in violation of Section 8 of our bylaws. He plows roads throughout our community at all hours, creating noise disturbances and property damage. And when the board, acting on complaints from multiple residents, asked him to simply provide his route schedule so we could coordinate and prevent further damage, he refused." "That's not true," I said loudly, standing up. "I don't operate a commercial snow plowing business. I'm a county contractor. There's a difference." Karren's smile didn't waver. "Semantics, Owen. You're paid to plow snow. That's a commercial operation." "No, it's not. I'm not soliciting business in the neighborhood. I'm not operating out of my home. I have a contract with Grand Traverse County to plow public roads, which I've been doing for 8 years, long before you moved here and became HOA president." A murmur went through the crowd. I pressed on. "And I can't share my route information because my contract includes a non-disclosure agreement. It's confidential county information. The county legal team has already sent you a cease and desist about this, Karren." "A cease and desist that has no legal standing over HOA bylaws," Karren countered. "The county doesn't govern what happens within our private community. The roads I plow are public county roads," I shot back. "The county absolutely has jurisdiction over those, and they've made it clear that you don't have the authority to demand I violate my contract with them." An older man I recognized as Frank Peterson, whose wife Karren had mentioned in her initial complaint about the mailboxes, stood up. "Excuse me, I'd like to say something. My wife is the one who supposedly couldn't get to the mailbox that day Karren mentioned. First of all, it was maybe a 15-minute inconvenience, not 2 hours. Second, the snowbank that was in the way wasn't even created by Owen. It was from the HOA's own snow removal guy. I saw him pile it there myself." Karren's face tightened. "Frank, I don't think you understand the broader issue here." "I understand perfectly well. You're mad that someone told you no, and you're using the HOA as your personal weapon to go after him." Frank sat down to scattered applause. Karren tried to regain control of the meeting. "Let's move on to the vote. The board is proposing a motion to assess Owen Edwards $1,400 in accumulated fines for non-compliance, plus an additional $100 per day until he provides the requested information and pays the commercial vehicle storage fees." "I'd like to make a counter-motion," said a woman I didn't know well, Jennifer something. "I move that we table all of this until we get a legal opinion from our own attorney about whether the board even has the authority to demand this information and assess these fines." "That's out of order," Karren snapped. We already have a legal opinion. Our attorney confirmed the board's authority." "Your attorney," Jennifer said pointedly. "Not the HOA's attorney. You hired Marcus Webb without board approval." This was news to me. The murmur in the room grew louder. Karren's face was now quite red. "I have authority as president to retain legal counsel on behalf of the board." "Not without a vote, you don't," said another board member, a guy named Steve who I think was the treasurer. "That's in the bylaws too, Karren. Section 3, subsection B. Any expenditure over $500 requires a board vote." The meeting devolved into chaos after that. People were arguing about bylaws, about Karren's authority, about whether I was in violation of anything. Karren kept trying to regain control, but she had lost the room. Finally, Frank Peterson stood up again and made a motion to adjourn the meeting without any votes on the proposed fines. Enough people seconded it that Karren had no choice but to put it to a vote. The motion passed overwhelmingly. As people filed out, several neighbors came up to me to apologize or express support. Bill clapped me on the shoulder. That went well considering. Karren, meanwhile, was packing up her laptop with sharp, angry movements. As I walked past her to leave, she looked up at me. "This isn't over, Owen." "Not by a long shot." "Yeah, I figured," I said tiredly. "But maybe take a step back and ask yourself if this is really worth all this energy. I'm just trying to do my job." "Your job is damaging this community," she hissed, "and I'm going to prove it." I left the community center with a knot in my stomach. Karren had the look of someone who was going to do something drastic, and I didn't know what to expect. The next morning, I woke up to my phone ringing at 5:30. It was Tom Richardson, and he sounded stressed. "Owen, we've got a situation. Karren Darlene filed a Freedom of Information Act request demanding all documents related to your contract with the county, including route maps, timing, and communications." I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "Can she do that?" "She can file the request, but we're going to fight it. FOIA requests have exemptions for proprietary information and security-related data. Our legal team is already preparing a response denying the request on those grounds, but it's going to tie up resources and time." "I'm sorry, Tom. I never wanted any of this to blow up like this. It's not your fault. This woman has clearly made it her mission to make your life difficult. But here's the thing, Owen. She's now officially interfering with county operations. Filing frivolous complaints, making false reports, and now using FOIA as a weapon to try to get information she's already been told she can't have. The county attorney is considering filing charges. Charges, like criminal charges, potentially. Harassment, filing false reports, interfering with a government contractor. It depends on how far she pushes this. I didn't want Karren to be arrested. Despite everything, the idea of it seemed extreme. I just wanted to be left alone to do my job, but Karren wasn't done. Over the next week, she launched what could only be described as a full-scale campaign against me. She posted in neighborhood Facebook groups about how I was hiding something by refusing to share my routes. She sent letters to other county contractors, asking if they had ever witnessed me driving recklessly or damaging property. She even went to a county commission meeting and tried to speak during public comment about how the county was protecting a bad actor. The county commissioners were not amused. The board chair actually cut her off mid-speech and explained that personnel matters weren't appropriate for public comment. But Karren had succeeded in making a scene, and local news picked up on it. A reporter from the Traverse City Record, Eagle, called me for comment. I explained my side of the story, emphasizing the confidentiality agreement and the fact that Karren's complaints had been investigated and found baseless. The reporter seemed sympathetic and wrote a fairly balanced article, but the headline was sensational. HOA President vs. County Snow Plow Driver. Dispute over route information escalates. The article brought more attention, which was the last thing I wanted. But it also brought support from unexpected places. The County Workers Union issued a statement backing me up. Other contractors reached out to share their own HOA horror stories, and several attorneys contacted me offering pro bono help if I wanted to sue Karren for harassment. I appreciated the support, but I still just wanted this to end. The end came, finally, on a cold Saturday morning in late February. I was out on my route, clearing a section of County Road 611, when I got a call from the police department. "Mr. Edwards, this is Detective Sarah Mitchell with Traverse City PD. I need to ask you some questions about Karren Darlene." My heart sank. "What happened?" "We arrested her this morning. She was caught on security camera footage from the county DPW offices attempting to break into a filing cabinet where route information is stored." I nearly dropped my phone. "She what?" "She apparently let herself into the building when a worker opened the door to carry in supplies. She told the worker she had a meeting with Tom Richardson. When the worker left, she went straight to the operations room and tried to access locked files. The whole thing is on camera." I pulled my truck over to the side of the road, trying to process this. "Is she okay? Like mentally?" "That's not for me to say, but she's currently being held on charges of trespassing, attempted theft of government property, and attempted access to restricted information. Given her prior cease and desist letter and the documented pattern of harassment, the county attorney is treating this very seriously." Detective Mitchell asked me a series of questions about my interactions with Karren, the HOA disputes, and whether I had ever felt threatened. I answered honestly, explaining the whole timeline from her initial demand to the nails in my tires to the HOA meeting fiasco. "We're aware of most of this from the county's documentation," the detective said, "but we needed your statement on record. The county attorney will likely be in touch about testifying if this goes to trial." After I hung up, I sat in my truck for a long time, watching the snow fall. I felt a weird mix of relief and sadness. Relief that this nightmare was apparently over, but sadness that it had come to this. Karren had seemed so convinced she was in the right, so certain that I was the one breaking rules and causing problems. How had she convinced herself that breaking into a county building was a reasonable next step? Tom Richardson called me later that day to fill in more details. The security guard caught her red-handed trying to pick the lock on a filing cabinet labeled Route Information Confidential. When he confronted her, she claimed she had permission from the county commissioners to access the files. Of course, she didn't. The guard called the police, and they took her into custody. What's going to happen to her? That's up to the prosecutor, but given the circumstances, I'd guess she's looking at probation at minimum, maybe some community service. The county attorney is pushing for a strong response to discourage anyone else from thinking they can just break into government buildings to get information they want. The news spread through Lakeview Heights quickly. By Sunday evening, there was an emergency HOA board meeting to discuss Karren's removal as president. I didn't attend, but Bill filled me in later. It was unanimous. They voted her out immediately and installed Steve as interim president. There was also a vote to rescind all the fines and violations she had issued against you. Apparently, the board realized that none of it was properly authorized in the first place. She had been acting unilaterally on a lot of things. What about the commercial vehicle fee? Gone. Steve pointed out that your truck doesn't meet the definition of a commercial vehicle under the bylaws. It's just a personal truck with a plow attachment that you use for your county job. no different than someone who has a work van. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. So it's really over. It's really over. Well, except for the criminal case, but that's not your problem. Karren's case moved through the system relatively quickly. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal, guilty plea to misdemeanor trespass and attempted theft, with the more serious charges dropped. She received 2 years of probation, 100 hours of community service, a $5,000 fine, and a permanent ban from entering county buildings except for public areas during normal business hours. She was also required to issue a written apology to me, to the county, and to the HOA. The apology arrived in my mailbox 6 weeks after her arrest. It was clearly written by her lawyer and was about as sincere as a campaign promise, but it was something. I, Karren Darlene, acknowledge that my actions toward Owen Edwards were inappropriate and not justified. I apologize for the harassment and the false complaints. I also apologize to Grand Traverse County for wasting resources and for my illegal entry into county property. I understand that my behavior was wrong, and I am committed to making amends. Karren and her husband quietly put their house on the market in April and moved to Ohio by June. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that her husband had been mortified by the whole situation and had wanted to leave Michigan entirely. The new HOA president, Steve, turned out to be reasonable and low-key. He sent out an email to all residents clarifying the rules about work vehicles and commercial operations, making it clear that having a job that required a truck or van wasn't the same as running a business out of your home. He also established clearer procedures for how violations would be investigated and issued, including requiring board votes before any fines were assessed. Life in Lakeview Heights returned to normal, or at least as normal as an HOA community ever gets. I continued my snow plow routes for the county without interference. My neighbors waved when they saw me coming home from work. The annual HOA barbecue that summer was actually pleasant, with no one trying to measure the height of anyone's grass or debate the acceptable shade of beige for mailbox posts. Tom Richardson retired that year after putting in his 25 years with the county. At his retirement party, he pulled me aside and said, "You know, Owen, in all my years dealing with HOAs, townships, and residents, I've never seen someone quite as determined to get information they had no right to as Karren Darlene. But I've also never seen someone handle it with as much patience as you did. You could have lost your temper a dozen times, but you kept your cool and let the system work. That's not easy." I appreciated the compliment, though honestly, there had been plenty of moments when I wanted to lose my temper. But I had learned a long time ago that anger rarely solved problems, especially when dealing with bureaucracy or people who were convinced they were right. The following winter, I was out on my regular route when I passed by where Karren's house had been. The new owners had already made changes, painting the door a tasteful navy blue and removing those ridiculous columns. They also didn't seem interested in HOA politics, which was refreshing. As I plowed down Pinewood Drive past my own house, I thought about the whole saga. It had been stressful and frustrating, but it had also shown me something important about community and about standing up for what's right, even when someone with a perceived authority is trying to push you around. The confidentiality clause in my contract had seemed like just another piece of legal paperwork when I signed it 8 years ago. I never imagined it would become the center of a neighborhood war. But the county had put that clause in place for good reasons, and I was glad I had stuck to my guns instead of caving to Karren's demands. If I had given in, who knows what kind of precedent that would have set? Would other HOAs start demanding route information? Would residents in other communities think they had the right to operational details about county services? The snow continued to fall as I finished my route, the plow blade scraping rhythmically against the asphalt. It was peaceful out here in the early morning hours, just me and the empty roads and the quiet satisfaction of doing a job well. No HOA drama, no demands for information I couldn't share, no violation notices taped to my door, just me, my truck, and the snow. Bill Anderson called me one evening in March, about a year after the whole incident had ended. "Hey, Owen, I've got to tell you something funny. You remember how Karren was always going on about property values? How could I forget? Well, I just saw the Zillow estimate for homes in our neighborhood. Property values have actually gone up about 8% in the last year. Let me guess, Karren would take credit for that if she was still here. Probably. But the real estate agent I talked to said it's because word got around that the HOA is now run by reasonable people who don't harass residents over nothing. Apparently, that's a selling point." Bill laughed. "Who knew that having a sane HOA president would be good for property values?" We both chuckled at the irony. Karren had been so obsessed with maintaining property values through strict rules and enforcement that she had never considered that maybe people would pay more to live in a neighborhood where they weren't constantly worried about getting violation notices for minor infractions. The county renewed my contract for another 3 years that spring. During the meeting where I signed the paperwork, the new county administrator, a woman named Patricia Hayes, who had taken over when her predecessor retired, mentioned that they had updated their contractor confidentiality training. We added a whole section about handling requests from HOAs and residents for operational information, Patricia explained. "We're calling it the Karren Clause internally, though that's obviously not the official name." I had to laugh at that. Even after moving to Ohio, Karren Darlene had left her mark on Grand Traverse County, just not in the way she had intended. Looking back on the whole experience, I realized I had learned several important lessons. First, always read your HOA bylaws carefully and know your rights. Karren had claimed authority she didn't actually have, and if more people had been familiar with the rules, her overreach might have been stopped earlier. Second, document everything. The security camera footage of Karren prowling around my truck had been crucial. So had the emails, letters, and records of every interaction. When things escalated to the legal level, having that documentation made all the difference. Third, and perhaps most importantly, know when to stand your ground. It would have been easier in some ways to just give Karren what she wanted, to share the route map, and hope she would go away. But that would have violated my contract with the county and potentially put me at legal risk. Sometimes the harder path is the right path. The story made the rounds in local government circles. I heard from other county contractors who had faced similar situations with overzealous HOA boards. A few of them even asked for copies of the cease and desist letter the county had sent to Karren, wanting to have a template in case they ever needed it. One guy from Leelanau County called me specifically to talk about his situation. His HOA was demanding he move his work trailer off his property, claiming it was a commercial vehicle even though he only used it to haul his lawn care equipment to his county parks maintenance job. "Did your contract have a confidentiality clause?" he asked. "It did, but that's not what applied in your case. You're not dealing with confidential information, just vehicle storage. Check your HOA bylaws carefully. Most of them define commercial vehicles by size, weight, and whether you're operating a business out of your home. A trailer you use for a regular job probably doesn't qualify." I heard later that he successfully fought off his HOA using similar arguments to what I had used. It felt good to help someone else navigate that mess. The seasons changed, and life went on. I added a landscaping contract with the county to my winter plowing work, keeping me busy year-round. The construction business I had started years ago was now mostly just side projects for friends, but I didn't mind. The county work was steady, paid well, and aside from one extremely memorable incident with an HOA president, it was relatively drama-free. Jennifer, the woman who had spoken up at the chaotic HOA meeting, eventually became HOA president after Steve decided not to run again. She instituted a bunch of common-sense reforms, including requiring board votes for any enforcement actions and establishing an appeals process for violations. She also organized neighborhood events that were actually fun, like a summer movie night in the park and a holiday lights competition that encouraged creativity rather than enforcing rigid standards. Under her leadership, Lakeview Heights became the kind of community it should have been all along. A place where neighbors looked out for each other, where rules existed to maintain property and safety but weren't wielded as weapons, and where someone like me could do their job without interference or demands for information I legally couldn't share. I still see the route map conversation pop up occasionally in HOA forums online. Someone will post asking if they can demand information from a neighbor about their work schedule or business operations. And inevitably, someone else will reference that case in Michigan where an HOA president got arrested for trying to force a snow plow driver to share county information. The facts often get garbled in the retelling, like a game of telephone played across the internet. But the core lesson remains. HOAs have authority over certain things within their communities, but that authority has limits, especially when it comes into conflict with government contracts, employment law, or basic privacy rights. I thought about writing up my experience for one of those HOA horror story websites, but I never got around to it. The whole thing felt both intensely personal and strangely universal. Personal because it had taken over months of my life and caused real stress. Universal because anyone who has ever lived in an HOA community has probably dealt with some version of an overzealous board member who forgot that they were supposed to be serving their neighbors, not ruling over them. Karren's apology letter still sits in a file folder in my office, along with all the other documentation from that period. I kept everything, just in case. You never know when you might need to prove what happened, especially if Karren ever decided to make trouble again from wherever she landed in Ohio. But I doubted she would. According to the terms of her probation, any further harassment of me or interference with my county work would be a violation that could land her in jail. And even if she were inclined to cause problems, she was now hundreds of miles away with presumably bigger concerns, like rebuilding her reputation and figuring out how to live in a new community without immediately making enemies. The winter after Karren left was one of the snowiest in recent memory. I logged more hours on my plow routes than I had in years, clearing snow from County Road 611, County Road 633, and all the smaller residential streets that connected to them. Every time I drove through Lakeview Heights, plowing the public roads that ran through our community, I thought about how absurd it had been for Karren to think she had the right to control when and how I did my job. The county roads were just that, county roads. They belonged to the public, maintained by the county, and operated according to county policies. An HOA might control what color you painted your fence or whether you could have a satellite dish, but they had no say over how the county maintained public infrastructure. It seemed so obvious now, but Karren had convinced herself otherwise. I wondered sometimes what had driven her to such extremes. Was it really just about control? Did she genuinely believe that a snow plow route map was somehow dangerous in my hands but safe in hers? Or was it something deeper? Some need to feel important or powerful in a life that maybe felt small or unsatisfying. I would never know the answers to those questions, and it probably didn't matter. What mattered was that the situation had been resolved, that the legal system had worked the way it was supposed to, and that my community had ultimately sided with reason over authoritarianism. Bill and I sometimes joked about writing a book called Surviving Your HOA, Lessons from the Great Snow Plow War of Lakeview Heights. It would be filled with practical advice like install security cameras immediately, read every word of your bylaws, and never assume the HOA president actually knows what they're talking about. But we never wrote that book. Instead, we just lived our lives, went to the occasional HOA meeting when something actually important was being discussed, and waved to each other across the street on sunny mornings when the snow had finally melted and spring was breaking through. The Grand Traverse County Department of Public Works sent out a newsletter one spring that included a profile of long-term contractors. I was featured alongside several others, with a photo of me standing next to my truck and a brief description of my 8 years with the county. The article mentioned that I had successfully navigated challenging situations while maintaining the confidentiality and professionalism required of county contractors. It was a nice way of acknowledging the Karren situation without actually naming it. Tom Richardson had retired by then, but I heard through colleagues that he had suggested I be included in the profile specifically because of how I had handled that whole mess. The recognition felt good, but honestly, I was just glad to be known for my work rather than for being the center of an HOA controversy. I took pride in keeping the county roads clear and safe, in being reliable and thorough, in showing up even in the worst weather when most people were smart enough to stay home. That was the job, and that was what mattered. Years passed, and the Karren incident became just another story in the history of Lakeview Heights, occasionally retold at neighborhood gatherings but losing its sharp edges as time went on. New residents moved in who had never heard of Karren Darlene or the time the HOA president got arrested for breaking into a county building. To them, I was just Owen, the guy in the truck with the plow, a neighbor who kept to himself and did his job, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The community center, where that disastrous HOA meeting had taken place, eventually got renovated, with new chairs and a fresh coat of paint. Jennifer, the HOA president, joked at the ribbon-cutting ceremony that they should install a plaque. Site of the Great Route Map controversy, but cooler heads prevailed. Better to move forward than to memorialize old conflicts. I continued my work for the county, adding more contracts and eventually bringing on a part-time helper during the busiest winter months. My truck got upgraded, then upgraded again. The plow blade got replaced twice. The seasons turned, year after year, bringing their cycles of snow and sun, work and rest. And through it all, my route map remained exactly where it should be. Confidential, secure, and in the hands of the county that had entrusted it to me all those years ago. No HOA president, no matter how determined or misguided, had managed to change that fundamental fact. Sometimes, standing your ground is the hardest thing you can do. But sometimes, it is also the most important. The snow would fall again next winter and I would be ready.